Good evening, Chapter 6, Troubles for Anne. Rooney might possibly come in. And by the way, I'm in my pajamas. When Anne went off to start school on the first day of September, Marilla was worried. Would Anne get along with the other children? How would she ever hold her tongue during lessons? But things went more smoothly than Marilla thought they would. Anne liked school, made lots of friends, and got along just fine. Every day, Anne and Diana walked to school together. They had a wonderful time as they walked under the red and gold maple trees and around by the lake of shining waters. 3 weeks into the school year, Anne hadn't gotten into any trouble at all. One morning as they walked to school, Diana told Anne that Gilbert Blythe would be back in school that day. Gilbert had been helping on his uncle's farm during the summer. He had just gotten back to Abilene. Diana said Gilbert was handsome and liked to tease the girls. He was a little older than Anne and Diana. He was smart and he was used to being the best in his class. Anne liked being best in the class, too. When they sat down in the schoolroom, Anne looked across the aisle. There was Gilbert Blythe, a tall boy with curly brown hair and hazel eyes. He winked at her. She quickly turned away. That afternoon, while the teacher, Mr. Phillips, was busy at the back of the classroom, Gilbert tried to get Anne's attention. He winked at her again. She ignored him. Gilbert wasn't used to being ignored. Most of the girls liked it when he teased and flirted. She should look at me, this red-headed girl with the big eyes. What is the matter with this Anne Shirley girl? He thought. He reached across the aisle and picked up the end of Anne's long red braid. He whispered so everyone could hear, "Carrots, carrots." Anne didn't ignore him anymore. She jumped up and burst into angry tears. "You mean boy, how dare you?" And then thwack. Anne hit Gilbert over the head with her slate. The slate cracked, but Gilbert wasn't hurt. Mr. Phillips rushed to see what was going on. He made Anne stand in the corner for the rest of the day. She did not cry or hang her head. She was too angry to cry. She promised herself that she would never, ever talk to Gilbert again. She would never even look at him. When school was dismissed, Gilbert met her by the schoolhouse door. "I'm sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne," he said. "Honest, I am. Don't be mad." Anne walked past him like she didn't even see him. The very next day, Anne got into trouble again. Mr. Phillips went to the nearest farm for lunch every day. That day when he left for lunch, he told the children to be back in their seats when he returned. He said that anyone who was late would be punished. During lunch recess, all the children played in the woods behind the schoolhouse. When the bell rang, the girls ran back quickly. They sat down without a second to spare. The boys were playing a little farther away. They also ran toward the schoolhouse. Anne, who had been daydreaming at the very farthest part of the woods, was last. She ran fast and caught up to the boys just as they got to the door of the schoolhouse. The teacher was waiting for them. He didn't want to bother with punishing all of the latecomers, so he decided to punish just Anne to make his point. "Anne Shirley, since you seem to like the boys so much, you will sit with Gilbert this afternoon," the teacher said. "Did you hear what I said, Anne? Obey me at once." Anne felt angry and humiliated. It was so unfair. She walked across the aisle and sat down beside Gilbert. She buried her face in her arms on the desk. It was bad enough to be the only one punished when they were all guilty. It was worse to have to sit with a boy. Worst of all, that boy was Gilbert. When school let out, Anne went to her desk and took everything out. Her mind was made up. She would not go back to school ever again. She told Marilla so when she got home. "Nonsense, Marilla. I'm not going back, Marilla." Anne shook her head. "I'll learn my lessons at home. I will not go back to school." Anne was so stubborn about this that Marilla didn't know what to do with her. She decided to go to Mrs. Rachel Lynde for advice. "I heard about Anne's fuss at school," Miss Lynde told Marilla. "I don't know what to do with her," Marilla replied. "She says she won't go back to school. What should I do, Rachel?" "Well, I think Mr. Phillips was right, but I wouldn't tell the child that. He should have punished all of them that were late, not just Anne. If I were you, I would let her stay at home for a while. If you force her to go now while she's mad, she might get in even more trouble. She will soon wonder what she's missing and decide to go back." Marilla took Mrs. Lynde's advice. Anne learned her lessons at home, did her chores, and played with Diana. Diana tried to get Anne to forgive Gilbert Blythe, but this was the one thing that Anne would not do for her friend. One Saturday in October, Marilla told Anne she could invite Diana for tea. "Oh, Marilla," Anne said, "how perfectly lovely." "I have to go to my ladies' club meeting," Marilla said. Use the old brown tea set, and you can have some of the cookies. There's some raspberry cordial on the second shelf of the sitting room closet. You and Diana can have some of it if you like." When Diane arrived, the two girls shook hands like grown-ups do. They went up to Anne's East Gable room and sat with their toes in proper position and chatted. They were ever so polite to each other. After a while, they went out to play in the orchard. All afternoon, they ate apples and talked. The girls had a very good time. Diana told Anne all the school news. When she talked about Gilbert, Anne jumped up and said, "Let's go in now." Anne went to the sitting room to get the raspberry cordial. She looked on the second shelf of the closet like Marilla had told her. The raspberry cordial wasn't there. She looked on the top shelf. There it was. She put it on a tray with a tall glass. "Please help yourself, Diana," she said politely. "I don't want any right now. I'm still full from all the apples." Diana poured herself a glassful and took a sip. "That's awfully nice raspberry cordial, Anne," she said. "I'm real glad you like it. Take as much as you want." Diana drank a second glassful of cordial and then a third. Anne just chattered on and on and on. "Why, Diana, what's the matter?" Anne asked. At last, Diana stood up, then staggered. She sat down again, holding her head. "I'm awful sick," she said. I must go home. I'm awful dizzy." Anne walked Diana to the Barrys' fence. Then she went back to Green Gables and got tea ready for Matthew. The next afternoon, Anne came home crying. "Mrs. Barry said that I got Diana drunk Saturday," she said. "She's never going to let Diana play with me again. Oh, Marilla." Marilla was amazed. "Got Diana drunk? What did you give her?" "Just raspberry cordial," cried Anne. "I didn't think it would get people drunk, not even if they drank 3 glasses. Marilla went to the sitting room closet. There on the shelf was her homemade currant wine. Then she remembered putting the raspberry cordial down in the cellar. It was not in the closet like she had told Anne. "Anne, you gave Diana wine instead of raspberry cordial. Didn't you know the difference?" "I never tasted it," wailed Anne. "Diana got awfully sick and had to go home. Mrs. Barry said that she was simply flat drunk. She thinks I did it on purpose." Marilla went to Mrs. Barry to set things straight, but Mrs. Barry didn't believe her. She said Diana couldn't play with Anne ever again. Poor Anne cried herself to sleep that night. Anne was very sad. She moped around the house all day. The next Monday, she surprised Marilla. She said that she was going back to school. She would do her best to be a good student. It was better than sitting home all alone with no friend to play with. The children were all happy to see Anne. They had missed her. After lunch, Gilbert tried to give her an apple, but she wouldn't touch it. Anne worked very hard on her lessons. Gilbert would not be best in the class if she would help it. Gilbert thought it was all in fun, but for Anne, it was war. One day, Gilbert would lead in spelling, but the next day, Anne would pull ahead. One morning, Gilbert would make the best grade in arithmetic, but the next day, Anne would win the prize. By the end of the term, both Anne and Gilbert were promoted to the next grade. They started studying harder subjects like Latin and geometry.